Because I think this would be an impossible job to do without empathy. If you really didn't feel for the plight of the folks who are in your office and had something terrible happen to them, I mean, you have to understand that the people that we represent have undergone the worst thing probably that's ever happened to their family and may ever happen to them, especially if somebody's been catastrophically injured or they've had a family member killed.
Hello and welcome to the Attorney Post, where we give you the inside scoop with top attorneys in their field. And now, here's our host, Justin West.
All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Attorney Post, where we discuss what's going on in various facets of the law with attorneys at the top of their game to help you navigate the ins and outs of the various legal fields and jurisdictions. Because, as I always say, if you don't know your rights, you don't have any. Today, I'm very pleased to be joined by Bradford Kendall, can't talk today, who runs the eponymous law firm that bears his name. That is the Kendall Law Group in Kansas City. He's an injury attorney. Brad, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Hey, thanks for having me, Justin.
Absolutely, my pleasure. And Brad has been very, very patient with me. I was telling him it's been a host of silly things going on today, and he's been very patient with me, so I always appreciate that. We're going to jump over, take a look really quickly at Brad's website. This is KendallInjuryLaw.com. That's Kendall, KendallInjuryLaw.com. We will have a link in the description below. His number is 816-531-3100. That's 816-531-3100. As always, link and phone number in the description below. It is a full service injury law firm based in Kansas City, and we're going to be digging into all the different things he does. He's a top-rated attorney serving families in the Kansas City metro area. Before we begin, as always, we're going to jump over and read from our sponsors. Our first sponsor today is National ERC. You may have noticed the world went through a pandemic, and many businesses were forced to shut down, reduce their hours, had supply chain interruptions, and ultimately suffered from reduced revenue in 2020 and 2021. What you may not know is that Congress passed the CARES Act, which allocated $400 billion in stimulus funds for small businesses that never needs to be paid back. It's fundamentally or functionally a retroactive tax credit. And if you had any W-2 employees during the pandemic, you can be entitled to anywhere from a couple $1,000s up to $26,000 per W-2 employee that you had. However, there's less than a year to claim this money before it is gone. Right now, if you go to nationalerc.org, you can use their calculator online to see how much money you can get, and they will help you get that money, and there's never any fee unless they are successful in getting the money for you. They've helped return over $1.3 billion to small businesses, and again, there's never any fee unless they're successful in getting the funds for you. The calculator is free. Visit them online at nationalerc.org. Our second sponsor today is Groove Funnels or Groove Pages. If you love spending $5,000 to $10,000 to host a brand new website and build it, and it gives you the option to, sell things to your customers or your clients, or host webinars or send out mail, if you love cobbling together thousands of different pieces of technology, then by all means keep doing whatever it is you're doing. But if you're like me, I hate that stuff. And that's why I personally recommend Groove Pages, the all-in-one website, sales funnel, email marketing platform from internet marketing legend Mike Filsame. Right now, you can actually try it completely free. Visit theattorneypost.com/groove. That is theattorneypost.com/groove. You can try it basically entirely free, and they're running a special right now. This is the type of platform, if you were to buy all these things together, a website, a sales, a funnel, a contact, a form, products, affiliate, video, blogging, webinars, all of these things, and cobble them together yourself, you would probably spend over $1,500 per month just for a platform that can do all those things. There are some all-in-one platforms out there, and they run about $300 to $700 a month. But right now, you can lock in Groove Pages' entire platform with unlimited websites, unlimited funnels, unlimited contacts, unlimited forms, etc., for just $497 a year. That's basically $42 a month. It is literally the cheapest price you can pay to get a fully functioning, fully operational website, sales funnel platform. And again, you can try it completely free, no credit card needed. Just visit theattorneypost.com/groove. That is theattorneypost.com/groove. All right. That was a lot to say. So we are joined again with Brad Kendall. Now, Brad is a seasoned personal injury attorney and wrongful death attorney. He has over 25 years of experience specializing in transportation-related accidents, medical malpractice, and nursing home neglect. He graduated from the University of Missouri and Kansas City School of Law in 1990, so he has been practicing law again for about 25 years. And he practiced in multiple states, including Kansas and Missouri, which, as you know, are right next to each other, as well as Colorado and Nebraska. He founded his own firm in 2001 to focus on cases where he has developed specialized expertise, achieving record-setting jury verdicts and earning membership in the $1 Million Advocates Forum. Known for his ethical conduct, he has received an AB rating from Martindale-Hubbell and has served on the Missouri Supreme Court Committee evaluating ethical complaints against lawyers. That's an awful lot to say, and I'm sure it barely scratches the surface. So my first question to you, Brad, is just this. What did I miss?
Well, it's closer to 35 years of doing this than 25. And so, yeah, I've been at it a long time, and I gravitated toward the personal injury space almost immediately after I did my training. I did a year at the Court of Appeals helping a judge write opinions, and then I went out into the great blue yonder of the legal world. And about a year into that, I realized I really did want to focus on personal injury and wrongful death. And so I have spent well over 30 years honing my skills doing injury and death cases. And because I've been at it a long time, I now really just try to focus on the more catastrophic injury cases and the death cases as opposed to the more minor injury cases. And if somebody has a minor injury, I can certainly get them to a good lawyer whose practice handles those, but that's not really kind of what we do here.
Okay. So how do people find you? Give me, you kind of just gave me your pitch there a little bit, but what sets you apart from everyone else? How do people find you? Why do they choose to work with you?
So the approach that I've kind of developed over the years is more of a, under promise and over deliver approach. And as a young lawyer, that's not really kind of how it's done. It's more like tell everybody they've got a great case and then figure out if they've got a case at all. And my approach is really to be brutally honest with everybody. And a lot of times I tell them, you may not be hearing what you want to hear, but I'm gonna respect you enough to tell you the truth, why I don't think you have a case or a case that my firm can help you with. And I lay out all the reasons, and I spend a lot of time talking to people and telling them things that they have a hard time getting a lawyer on the phone at all. They may talk to an intake person or somebody else or an assistant, but not the lawyer that's going to handle the case. And so that's my approach is I will actually talk to people if I'm able to and very patiently explain to them all the elements that we have to prove and what may be lacking in their case. And so, and I tell them, you're free to call as many lawyers as you can get on the phone, but you may be wasting your time and maybe I can give you some closure here and you can move on. And in fact, I talked to a lady this morning who had a car crash in Nebraska where I'm also licensed. And we talked about the pros and cons. And I said, listen, if you decide to go forward with a lawsuit, that's absolutely your right to do it, but you're going to hate it because it's not going to be what you think it is because, she had a very minor injury, which is good. I tell people the good news is you're not catastrophically injured. And the bad news is you're not catastrophically injured because it's going to be difficult to actually be able to justify bringing a case for injuries like yours. And a lot of people, by the time we're done talking, they get it and they thank me for being honest with them.
Sure. Okay. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And truth is important. I always say if you don't know your rights, you don't have any, but sometimes knowing your rights is, accurately assessing all of the information on the ground. And sometimes I guess the phrase is the juice ain't worth the squeeze, right? Sometimes it's just not worth it to take all the efforts. And I think it's important to have an attorney that's willing to lay all that on the line and let you know, whether or not you even have a case. Because again, if you don't know your rights, you don't have any. So let me ask you this, Brad. What got you into law? Did you grow up on, Perry Mason and Matlock reruns, or did you just kind of stumble into law? Did you always know you wanted to be an attorney, or is this something that was kind of a shift in your trajectory? And how did you get into PI law?
Yeah, I pretty well knew a long time ago that this is what I wanted to do to make my living. And I didn't grow up in a family of lawyers. I'm the only lawyer in the family.
You're the black sheep.
I'm the black sheep of the family. That's right. And it's just always interested me, the idea of going into a courtroom and I met a friend the other day and he said that he misses playing sports because he misses the competition. And, he's in his 40s and he's like, I'm having a hard time finding that in my life. And I said, well, I'm lucky because what I do is very competitive because I'm always up against insurance companies or corporations or hospitals, whatever the case may be. And they are paying very good lawyers to take a contrary position to what I'm doing. So it is, if I'm either going to win or I'm going to lose. And being able to do something that's competitive like that for a living is another great thing about this way to make a living.
That's awesome. That makes a lot of sense. So let me ask you this. Now, this is a question I often find very fascinating because I get very different answers from people all around. And you're in my neck of the woods. For my listeners, they know I'm in Atchison, Kansas, little tiny bite out of the corner. Well, Kansas City's like 45 minutes away. So I'm curious if your experience was similar to mine or not. We just got through a couple years ago at this point with the pandemic, and I found that so many people had so many varied approaches to the pandemic. They experienced so many different things in the way that they ran their offices, in the way that the courts ran, in the way that they found clients or interacted with clients, et cetera. What was your experience of that pandemic response? Did it totally grind everything to a halt? Did it change the way you interface with doing hearings and depositions? Has some of those changes been for the better and you keep them up? How are you trying to get back to normal as possible? Did you ever have to do a Zoom hearing? Tell me about your experience with the pandemic response.
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is maybe not the most politically correct answer, but a lot of good came out of the pandemic for law firms. And what I mean by that is we were required to implement things. And thank God we're in the information age. If we were in the 1970s, we'd all be out of business. There'd be no way to carry on. But the first month or two of the pandemic, everything did shut down, and then everybody sort of licked their wounds, and we sort of got back up, and the courts opened back up, and they allowed us to basically do business as usual with Zoom and doing hearings through Zoom, doing depositions through Zoom, and those things. Now that the pandemic's over, those things haven't gone away. And so what I would have to do previously is I'd have to get on an airplane to go to Boston to take a deposition of an expert witness. Now, for the most part, I'm doing that from my desk. I'm doing it via Zoom, and there has been really no drop off in terms of what we get done by Zoom versus being in somebody's conference room halfway across the country. So those things are positive developments that I don't think are ever going to go away. Yeah, for a while there, for the first year, let's say 2020, there pretty well weren't any trials for at least half of that year, or at least maybe 3 months of that year. And then the courts sort of opened back up and cases started getting tried again. And again, we're implementing Zoom into live trials where there will be a witness, usually they're doctors or they could be experts, who are allowed to give a deposition in real time via Zoom. Previously, what we would have to do is we'd have to go to the doctor's office and we'd have to videotape that doctor's testimony, and then we play it in our trial. And that was good because very few doctors are going to leave their practice and come to the courthouse to give testimony. They're just not. So you've got to preserve their testimony ahead of time. And when you do that, things may change. And so you've got a testimony a month before trial, and then something may change, but you're still stuck with that testimony. If you're able to pipe in that testimony live with Zoom while the trial's going, like judges are still allowing us to do, that actually can be the best of all possible worlds. You're just kind of limited to the Wi-Fi connection in the courthouse. So sometimes they're not great. Sometimes they're just fine.
Gotcha. I'm guessing, can you ever foresee a Zoom jury, and do you feel like that would be a terrible idea or something you'd be open to?
No, there have been Zoom juries. They did that. That may be something that does go away, but last year there were some trials with actual jurors participating via Zoom. And I don't think that's the preferred way of doing it, because when we're doing trial work, we want to be able to actually observe jurors to see what's resonating with them and maybe what's not. And you really can't do that if they're watching at home in their pajamas and you can't really see what they're doing.
Yeah. Well, and there's something to be said. I mean, when you're in front of a jury, it's kind of a performance, and part of a performance is being able to read the room, right? And so maybe the prosecution said, or the defense says something, and you know that it's wrong, and you look over at the jury member, and he looks at you, and you know that you made a connection, and you're like, okay, this guy's on my wavelength. But it's hard to do that via Zoom. We were talking about this before the call, but I have to simulate eye contact with you by not looking at you and looking to my camera. And I feel like that's, of course, my listeners don't know this, but you actually have a really cool monitor he's got a camera right in the monitor, so he can actually kind of do this thing, right, where you're looking face to face and looking into the eyes. But for most of us, your camera's not in the monitor yet. So I feel like there'd really be something that would be lost in that. You'd lose some control of that courtroom. But I don't know. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And that's why I think that, unless there's another pandemic, I read something recently that some experts think there's going to be a bird flu pandemic next. Hopefully not. But if it happens, we've learned a lot through this COVID pandemic about how business continues and how we can continue to do what we do. And, the insurance companies still resolve claims. They have to, just the way insurance companies do business, where they have to
Yeah.
reserve money for claims. They couldn't just not pay claims. And so that kind of kept going, and we were able to keep moving things forward and, preparing cases for trial, and most of them settled. And that's not new for a pandemic. I mean, prior to the pandemic, the vast majority of cases do settle short of going to trial. That's just the numbers have gotten really high in terms of what cases settle and which ones don't. They don't all settle, but most of them do.
Yeah. I could see that. Have you ever sat on a jury before? That's something I always find interesting. If they make psychologists get psychoanalyzed before they can practice. I feel like attorneys should have to serve on a jury before they get to present. Have you ever been on a jury, or have you found that now that you're an attorney, they just kick you off immediately, or have you just never been called up for that civic duty?
So I've never been on a jury. I live in Kansas, and if memory serves me, I think attorneys aren't allowed to be on juries in Kansas. I may be wrong about that, but that may be why I've never gotten a jury summons. My wife got one recently and was all excited to go. And then the week before it started, she was told it wasn't necessary for her to come. So no, I've never done that. It would be a fun experience, though.
Yeah. I found myself in contempt of court one time because the notice for jury came like December 10th, and that was the day we left for our Christmas vacation, and we were gone through the beginning of the new year. We got back, it was about a 3-week long trip, and I already had a letter saying I was in contempt of court for not showing. I was like, oh gosh, come on guys, give me some credit
Yeah,
here.
they didn't. They
They
didn't come
summarily
take you to
dismissed
jail,
it.
though, right?
No, I went
Good.
right to the courthouse. I explained everything, and they were fine with it. So, and the only other time I was on, I got called up and it got dismissed. They settled or whatever, long before the case ever happened. So those are my only experiences too. But I always find it interesting, especially in your position, it would be like to be in the seat and understand what it's like to I guess to be on that side of the whole drama, so to speak.
Yeah, it
Um,
would be.
so let me ask you this. Now, you've set some record-setting cases. I'm sure you've had some great successes. I want to talk about those in a minute, but nobody bats 1,000 if you bat long enough. And I'm sure you've had a few times in your career, Brad, when you've had what you would consider to be a failure or a setback. And it could be anything from a witness who didn't show up or who said the wrong thing or, thought they got cocky, or it could be the fact that, maybe you just forgot to file some paperwork. But can you tell my listeners, Brad, about a time in your practice of law where you experienced what you consider to be a failure, but what did you learn from that? And how do you carry that forward to make sure you're always giving the best care to your clients?
Well, if anybody would tell you that they've never had any failures, if they're not being honest with you, because it's just the nature of it. We're doing this live. If you don't know for sure what somebody's going to say. They may be completely lose their composure. We were in trial many years ago, and our client, we called him as a witness, and he completely froze up to where he couldn't even talk. He couldn't even say his own name. That's how freaked out he was. And so we essentially had to kind of testify for him. And the judge, you're not really supposed to do that. You're not supposed to, say, isn't this how this happened? Isn't that right? Isn't that right? Those are leading questions. You're not allowed to do that. But we were able to pull it off. And so, yeah, there have been certainly times when things happen that you don't expect. And we had a case that was a real serious case with a, commercial vehicle crash. And we were able to get the trucking company to pay a lot of money for our client's injuries. And then we had a claim against another defendant, and the judge basically granted their motion to dismiss that claim, which was a big surprise. And we didn't anticipate that. So we got to deal with that in the Court of Appeals. And that's the mentality of some judges, which is to let the Court of Appeals sort it out, whether it's to grant motions or not grant motions. And sometimes you get those rulings that you just don't anticipate, and you have to deal with it.
Makes sense. Okay, so flip side, you've had some great successes, and I know you've set like some record breaking or record setting awards for some of your clients, and maybe that's what you'd focus on. Maybe it's something else entirely different. Maybe it's just a case that you thought you had no chance of winning, and it came out not only in your favor and your client's favor, but like better than you expected. Can you tell my client or tell my listeners, Brad, about one or two of the times in your practice of law that you're just most proud of, the things that you would consider, a feather in your cap, so to speak?
Well, there's a few things that happen over the years, and you try to remember the surprising results or the good things. I remember a case where we had a case that a train hit a vehicle at a railroad crossing, and we look at railroad collision cases and do a lot of transportation industry cases. But in this particular case, they have video cameras on the front of locomotives. And they record what the engineer in the train would be able to see. And the video that they had showed that the lady driving this vehicle really never looked in the direction the train was coming until the train or her vehicle's essentially on the tracks. And the railroad thought that was going to win them the case. Their position was she never looked. She never looked. And so it was very and it was a really difficult 3-week trial, and the jury found for our client and awarded a record, but a large sum of money. And in spite of this evidence that the railroad folks just thought was their ace in the hole, they were definitely going to beat us based on that video. And the response from the railroad claims people was, "You guys beat a video. I don't know how you did that." And it really wasn't about the video, the way we put the case together and tried the case. It was about the safety of the community and because the folks in that community had to use that crossing, and the railroad just didn't put the safety of that crossing first. And so that was our focus. And it wasn't really about a mistake that this woman may have made in the split second right before the crash happened.
I was going to say, how did you beat video evidence? But I guess you kind of answered the question there. You reframed, and there's something really important about that in communicating in general, right? You reframe it as this is a general safety issue, and there weren't. So was it missing like a certain kind of notification or crossbars or anything like that? Or I'm just kind of curious if I could pick a little bit. How did you reframe that?
So that particular crossing, it was up in Andrew County, Missouri, up north of St. Joe. And like most of the crossings in the United States, it didn't have active warning devices. In other words, it didn't have gates and lights. So the gates drop down when the train's more than 20 seconds from the crossing, and they actually block the motorist's ability to enter the crossing. And the lights flash, and that tells you a train's approaching. This crossing didn't have gates and lights. It just had the crossbuck signs. And all crossbucks do is tell you these are railroad tracks. They don't tell you a train is approaching and when it's approaching. And so, and most of the crashes that happen at railroad crossings are on these so-called passive crossings that don't have gates and lights. There's nothing there to actually warn the driver of the motor vehicle that, hey, a train is coming and you need to stay back. And because of sight lines at crossings, and the same is true with like commercial vehicles, semis. Sometimes the topography makes it difficult to see an approaching vehicle. And that's certainly the case with these railroad cases, is there can be trees growing or other vegetation, or like a weird angle. they like these tracks and roads to meet at 90-degree angles. Well, a lot of them don't. And if you
Yeah.
have to look kind of way back over your left shoulder to see a trend come from that way, or lean forward to look way right to see it makes it hard to safely negotiate that crossing. And that's what happened with that particular crossing. There were trees that would have blocked her view of the oncoming train until it was just too late. You enter what's called the point of no return when you're going a certain, 20 or 30 miles an hour, whatever it is. And, by that point, based on the speed of the train, you simply you're dead at that point if you can't see the train before that. And that was the unfortunate circumstance with that crash.
Gotcha. It's really fascinating because this is my day-to-day life, right? I mean, I live again about an hour away from you. You mentioned St. Joe. I was just up there yesterday, in fact, trying to get my car looked at. And I live in Atchison, which is a major train town. People used to know it's the Atchison Peak of Santa Fe. There's even a song from an old Broadway show or something. It's the Atchison Peak of Santa Fe. And little known history. I'm going to dump history on my listeners because you guys don't know this. But at one point, Atchison, Kansas, where I live, birthplace of Amelia Earhart, was set to be the Kansas City. Like that's really what it was. But there's a big bridge. We were literally built right on the Missouri River, and the people in Atchison just didn't want to foot the bill to build this bridge. So 40 miles south, they built this bridge, this train bridge, and all of a sudden everything shifted to Kansas City. But if that wouldn't have happened, if we would have built the bridge first, Atchison would be, people would be talking about to this day as like this major bustling metropolis. And as it is now, it's, 7 square miles and about 12,000 people. But yeah, I drive past these all sorts of, I mean, we are still a train town. We have trains that come through this town. I used to live literally a block from the trains, right where they turned. Oh, it's horrible. Metal on metal screeching all the time. But it's neat too, because it is just this fact of life. But yeah, when you leave here, when you drive up to St. Joe, there's all these little places where you can turn off, and a lot of them have lights now, but I remember when a lot of them didn't. It's just you turn and you just go. Generally, they keep it cut back so you can kind of see on both sides of you. But yeah, I could imagine there being certain spots where there's no warning. And if you don't growing up in train towns, a lot of our school buses have signs on the back that says we stop at all train tracks, right? So they stop, they have to open their door, they have to look both ways and listen. But if you don't do that, and they had to do that because these safety measures weren't in place. So that tells me that's exactly what you were going up against. And I still see a little bit of that here and there, but it's definitely improved. So anyway, I just find it fascinating that you're talking about stuff that I deal with on a regular basis. Because in a lot of my calls, a lot of my interviews, we don't ever get there. So I always find that I find it neat when I have some really kind of just a unique tie into what you're talking about. So it's very, very cool.
Lawyers who do what I do and have this kind of experience dealing with railroads and other, commercial carriers, we know from our experience that these railroad tracks are really unsafe, and the trains can be there. Like there was a big train crash a couple of years ago in Chariton County, Missouri, with an Amtrak passenger train, and those were BNSF tracks that run through there. And those Amtrak's go 90 miles an hour through there. And so if you're approaching a crossing and there's a 90-mile-an-hour train approaching, that train's going to be not even within your field of vision before you can get across there. So that's why when you have those fast trains going through there, it's all the more important that you would have gates and lights, or the ability for a motorist to know, hey, there's a really fast train approaching.
Yeah.
And it's just, most people just don't know how fast they can cover that ground at certain speeds. Even freight trains that are going 50 or 60 miles an hour cover a lot of ground real fast.
And they can't stop.
No, they can't.
There's a lot of kinetic force there that you just can't stop on a dime. So please don't play.
Well, the old joke is a train can't make a left-hand turn, and that's all true. They've got the right of way. They can't make a turn. They can't. So you just, the goal is just don't be there when they're there, because it's not going to be good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm sure you've also encountered just some random bizarre oddities in your practice of law, now going on 30 years or so, since 1990. So really almost 34 years. What's one of the most absurd things, Brad, that you've encountered in your practice of law? Something that just you're like, why did this happen this way? Or why are you really making this kind of an argument? Or I can't believe this series of events happened and led to this accident. What's one of the most absurd things you've encountered?
Well, luckily, most of the lawyers that that we deal with are good, experienced lawyers that know what they're doing. And I would much rather have a case against a good defense lawyer than against somebody that doesn't know what they're doing or somebody that's inexperienced, because good lawyers kind of know what the laws and know where the playing field is. And there's been times, and it's usually, I was a young lawyer once too. And that's one of those things you look back on that and you go, man, I wish I had, I wish I knew then what I know now. But it's usually the young lawyers that are working for insurance defense firms that they throw them out there and they don't really know what they're doing, and they take ridiculous positions, instructing witnesses not to answer questions. That you're not allowed to do that, generally speaking. There's a couple things, if it goes to like a privilege thing, you can do that, but everything else, the witness is supposed to answer the question. And we all know that, who've been practicing for a while. But you'll get some of those ridiculous things, and the best thing at that point is to just try to say, let's go off the record for a minute and try to reason with the person and say, look, you're not allowed to do that. And usually, if it's done in a non-threatening, non-aggressive way, we go back on the record and everybody's, knows what the rules are at that point. And I had to do that a few times over the years, and somebody probably had to do that for me 30 years ago when I was just getting started.
So I just had a follow-up question, and it just left. It's on the tip of my tongue. Shoot. I was totally gonna ask you about that. And it'll come back to me in a minute, probably.
Okay.
And if it does, it does. If it doesn't, it doesn't. That's okay.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. People probably come into your office sometimes, and you kind of touched on this at the beginning. And they probably have some unrealistic expectations. Maybe they think you can do things that you just can't do. What's one of the biggest, I would say, misconceptions or even myths that people bring into your office that you'd like people to understand just isn't the case? And what's something people can do to make sure they have the best possible chances at a good outcome should they be able to hire you or to bring you on as their attorney and have a case?
Well, so here's an example that I think sort of answers that question. When the pandemic hit 4 years ago, both Kansas and Missouri and about half the states in the United States passed these COVID immunity laws. And what those laws did, and this could, because my firm also handles nursing home injury and death cases. Broadly speaking, those COVID immunity laws, the ones in Kansas and Missouri that I'm most familiar with, essentially said if COVID had anything to do with the claim you're making, the facility, the hospital, the nursing home, essentially has immunity. And so explaining that to people who don't know what really goes on in these state capitals, these legislatures, where they're passing these laws that are, essentially, and I understand why they passed those laws, but they probably weren't necessary to do that. And so when somebody calls and I get the time frame of when their claim was, and I explain to them, I'm very sorry, but there's no way to bring a claim for the loss of your loved one because of they passed this law that basically gives the nursing home immunity for, some of that does make a little bit of sense, because if it was like they didn't treat my grandma the right way and give her the right care in the hospital for her COVID, it's like when this thing started, there was no standard of care for how you treat a COVID patient. They were figuring it out and they were trying all things, for a while there, they were making patients lie face down. They thought that would give them a better outcome. They didn't know what they were doing because this was a new process. And so, but, to explain to people who don't know that that's the law in the books, that there is no way to move forward with that. There is a lot of people are just incredulous when they hear that. And I'll give them the citation. They go, go on Google and see for yourself. But explain, that's just one example, but explaining to people like, Kansas used to have a law that limited the amount of money that you could get for any injury case for pain and suffering, basically anything that is considered a non-economic loss. Economic losses like lost income or medical bills or things like that. Those were never capped, but Kansas had this cap that on any kind of a case in Kansas, the most you could get for non-economic damages was $300,000. And so if you were rendered a paraplegic by a drunk driver, your lifetime of being a paraplegic, the pain and suffering associated with that was capped at $300,000. And for many years, it was very difficult to explain that to people because it just doesn't make any sense that they really wouldn't have the ability to go to the courthouse and have a shot at getting a reasonable outcome from that. Luckily, a few years ago, the Kansas Supreme Court determined that that statute was unconstitutional and it threw it out. And so we no longer are under that, but that applied to any kind of a case, car wreck case, hospital negligence case, fall down case, premises case, whatever. If your pain and suffering was capped and there's nothing anybody could do about it. So it's been a real good thing for that to no longer be the law of the land in Kansas. And we still have a law like that in Missouri, but it only applies to medical malpractice cases. And so we have to contend with that.
A lot of states have medical mal laws on the books that just don't make sense to me for exactly that reason. Like, sorry, we amputated the wrong leg and then we took off the right leg and now you have no legs and, here's $100,000. Sorry.
What's even worse in Missouri, the cap that they have in place now that they put in a few years ago, because there's been a cap in Missouri off and on back since the 1980s. And then at one point, the Missouri Supreme Court tossed it, and then they got together and they put a new cap in. And they have these two tiers for non-economic damages caps. One is a non-catastrophic injury, and two is a catastrophic injury. And the catastrophic injury cap at the time they did it was, I think, $700,000, and the one for the non-catastrophic was like, I think, $400,000. And then there's an adjuster on it increases every year, and so now it's $850 or something at the top end. But they defined in the law what constitutes a catastrophic injury, and it is shocking when you learn that if you lose one leg, let's say they commit malpractice and you've lost one leg, that's not under the catastrophic cap. That's under the lower cap. You've got to lose two limbs under this law in order to meet the definition for catastrophic injury, which is ridiculous.
That is absolutely absurd. That's crazy. I was going to ask you another question here because you were talking about, the pandemic and the response to it. And I always try to keep my show as apolitical as possible for the sake of my guests, but allow my guests to be as political as they want. This is a question that may border on political. And if you're really not happy with it, I'll even edit it out of the show. But I do know that since you live in Kansas, as do I, our Attorney General, Chris Kobach, is just announced like yesterday or the day before that they're going to be suing one of the makers of the shot, the Pfizer, for a number of misleading claims about their vaccine, about the testing it underwent, about whether or not what was tested was what was released as Comirnaty, or whether Comirnaty was never actually released and people kept getting the EUA shot. And I found this really fascinating because I do know that there's been a lot of people who've been harmed very directly as a result of this particular novel medicinal therapy, novel genetic therapy, we'll just say. Do you think that's going to be I don't want to say a burgeoning industry, but I'm really at a loss to see what the next 5 or 10 years look like. Especially if Kobach is successful, that means it'll probably be successful across the board. It'll open the floodgates. I know that, and again, I want to keep this as apolitical as possible, but if you look up the single largest criminal fine in history, the people that paid it was in fact Pfizer. I'm curious what you think about a burgeoning cottage industry of suing vaccine manufacturers if all of this actually happens.
I wasn't familiar with Kobach doing that.
I think it's breaking news. I just saw it like yesterday. So
okay,
really,
yeah. No, I wasn't familiar with it, but I'll be a little surprised. I think that might be a sign of these times that we're living in right now, and I'll be a little surprised if that turns into a real thing, and maybe that's going to be a red state versus blue state situation. There's already a federal law that people can use if they got harmed by a vaccine. I mean, and that existed prior to the pandemic that we just came out of. So there's already a means to redress injury caused by vaccines. It's been something that's been around for a long time, and people can go on there and file a claim and try to get paid that way. So I don't really understand why there might be something more that would be needed for that, but I guess I'll have to read up on it.
My understanding, and again, this is just my understanding, is that because this was emergency use authorization, it doesn't fall under the normal aegis for vaccines. And because it's emergency use authorization, deaths and injuries that resulted from this usually don't qualify for things like life insurance, right? You ceased to be in a way that violated your policy or whatnot. So apparently there's a whole hullabaloo about where this is going to go. I'm curious to see. Anyway, we'll leave it at that because I don't want to push you on something that you just don't have knowledge of, and I don't need you to shoot from the hip on this one. But
All right.
I figured I'd at least poke a little bit and see what you thought about that. So let me ask you this. This is something I've always found fascinating. I've always thought PI law is a fascinating space. You guys really do serve an industry that you make the law accessible to people who otherwise wouldn't have the law available, because you usually work on a contingency fee basis, no fee unless we win or whatever. I'm assuming you work on a very similar model. That seems to be the MO for PI law. So I think you guys fill a real specific need, and sometimes you get a bad rap, ambulance chaser or whatnot, but I think you guys are really out there doing good work, making sure injured people get the help that they need. But I have to assume it still takes a toll on you. You have to deal, I'm sure, with gruesome stuff on a regular basis. I'm sure you've seen pictures you'd rather not have seen. You've dealt with people who have undergone all sorts of injuries that you'd rather not have to, encounter. And obviously, I'm sure they would as well. How do you deal with the emotional toll of being an injury attorney and dealing with injured people, families with lost loved ones? Does it ever just wear you down?
Well, it can be difficult. I mean, I've told young lawyers over the years that you have to have empathy to do what we do. And if you don't have empathy for the folks who've been injured, you're probably on the wrong side, and you maybe want to switch over and defend insurance companies. I don't think too many of us went to law school saying, boy, I really hope I get to help that insurance company hold on to its money for its shareholders. But, it's fine. If that's the way you want to make a living, it's fine. So if you have the empathy,
corporations are people too, so
yeah, right. If you have because I think this would be an impossible job to do without empathy. If you really didn't feel for the plight of the folks who are in your office and had something terrible happen to them, I mean, you have to understand that the people that we represent have undergone the worst thing probably that's ever happened to their family and may ever happen to them, especially if somebody's been catastrophically injured or they've had a family member killed. And so understanding that they're not at their best, but they've been through just this terrible tragedy. And yeah, looking at autopsy photos or highway patrol photos of, dead bodies by the roadside in a semi crash, that's not easy to do. But it's necessary, and you kind of have to go down that road, and you have to be able to do that in order to help our clients. We have to know enough medicine to be able to do it because these are injury cases. So we have to know some anatomy and things like that. You have to know some basics about economics because we have economic losses, and oftentimes we will hire an economist to calculate the lost earning capacity suffered by our client. And then, you have to know some biomechanics to be able to talk about how the injury could have happened. And, you have to know some accident reconstruction or at least know who you're going to talk to educate you for that. So, there's a lot of hats that you have to wear in order to be a successful, good personal injury lawyer. But I think of all those hats, the one that may be the most important is to be empathetic and to really be able to understand what this person's gone through so you can, put their interest above yours, which is what we're required to do anyway.
Well, there you go. The good bedside manner too. Being able to just understand that people are people and everyone's human. I think the empathy is really important. How do you I ask this? Have you ever had someone come to you and you feel like the case has merit, but it just feels like the evidence is insignificant or insufficient? What do you do in that situation? how do you overcome those hurdles? I mean, again, maybe you've sort of already been there a little bit with the train incident before, but how do you handle a case that feels like it has merit, but it just has a very minimal amount of evidence?
So I normally say something along these lines, and I said this to a woman this morning who was talking to me about her claim, wanting us to take her case. You know, there are two big issues in a personal injury case. The first issue is liability. That is, what happened and whose fault is it? And can we prove it's the other person's fault or the other driver if it's a vehicle case? And the second big issue is what are the injury and damages? And so you don't get to the second issue unless you can clear the first hurdle, unless we can establish the liability part of it, because the damages don't matter if we can't prove the liability. So in a car crash case, we always get all the available evidence, which is if there's a police report, if there are any cameras that captured it, everything that's available, talk to the witnesses. And then we get the police report, and typically every police report I've ever seen, there's a place for the police officer to essentially point the finger of blame at each driver or no driver. There's places for them to indicate what they did wrong, following too closely, and that's a common scenario, or making an illegal turn. And so the best case scenario is the police officer has said the defendant driver didn't comply with this or that rule of the road, and our client did nothing wrong. And so that can be helpful, at least when dealing with insurance companies, because even though the police officer's opinions as to who did what wrong are never admissible in trial, they can be beneficial in getting the insurance company to say, okay, we accept liability as you're trying to resolve the case. And then when that happens, and then you're talking about what are the injury and what are the damages. So, the one from this morning, yeah, absolutely. A lot of these things get negotiated, and it just depends. But the lady I was talking to this morning, the police officer basically threw his hands up in the air and didn't assign anything to either of the two drivers. And this case involved a lady getting sideswiped by an 18-wheeler on a bridge. And it would have been helpful if the police officer had said, the trucker should have stayed in his lane. But he didn't. And so that's essentially, we're back to square one, and there were no witnesses. And so in that case, I told her it's going to be difficult, based on what I know of the available evidence, to be able to prove liability. We're still looking into it, but that's something I commonly, and again, my approach, like I said earlier, is brutal honesty, and just tell people, here's what we have to be able to prove. And if we can't prove it, we can't be successful. And I don't sugarcoat it, because I think people need to be told the truth.
There are things that people can do to help with documentation. Like, do you recommend people, for instance, I don't know, have a dash cam, or assuming nobody's like dying, take pictures or video of the scene? Like, what are the things that help, and what can people do to put themselves in the best position that should something like this ever happen, they have the ability to protect themselves?
So dash cam videos can be extremely helpful. We had a case that we resolved recently where just some passing motorist had a dash cam that saw this vehicle cross the center line, go up over the sidewalk, and knock down a pedestrian. And it captured it all on his dash cam, and then he provided it to the police. And so it was very, very helpful. That is very, very rare to have dash cam footage available. We've actually created a little pamphlet that we hand out at places that say, put this in your glove box, because when you're in a wreck, you're going to have a surge of adrenaline. You're going to maybe have a concussion. You're going to be confused. You're going to be emotional. You're not going to be thinking clearly, because nobody is. And so throw this in your glove box. And if you're in a wreck, pull it out and look at it, because it'll tell you what to do, who to get, what photos to take, write down this information from witnesses on this thing, and here's what the information you needed to get from the other driver. And I just tell people this pamphlet is to help you. It'll be, there's nothing on there about how great my law firm is. It's just, this is a guide that we created to help people, so they will have information that they need when they need it. Because I know just from lots of experience, people do not think clearly in the aftermath of a wreck.
Yeah. No, I can imagine. So having basically a step-by-step, even a flow chart.
Yeah, exactly right. That's why we designed it that way.
Yeah, their brain just kind of shuts down. I mean, I've been in those situations like, oh, what do I do? What do I do? We had a big snowstorm back in, I don't know, January, February, and I was just driving, and the daughter of one of our friends, she was late for school and had like scraped off part of her window, but not all the way. And like I was coming up the road and I was at the stop sign and stopped, and she just like turned, and I could tell she's gonna hit me. She's gonna hit me. I honked my horn. And sure enough, boom. And I don't want to do anything. I mean, they're friends of ours, and it's very minimal damage. And she was just so distraught. So like in this case, nobody's injured other than a little fender, ding.
Mhm.
But like even in that moment, I'm like, what do I do here? Like, do I
Yeah,
take pictures? Do I just, I know her family. Do I just get, insurance? Do I even want to involve insurance? And I think they didn't want to involve insurance, and I understand why.
yeah.
Um,
Some people don't. It makes sense. But the other thing I tell people, and this is in our pamphlet too, is always call the police. If it's anything but a tiny fender bender, you want the police to come out because they document everything. And then you have the benefit of a police report. Hopefully will point the finger of blame at the other driver. You'll have the benefit of that, and they'll write down witness names and things like that. But it makes it difficult when the police aren't called, and then, the insurance company's like, well, we're not going to accept liability on this one, and there's just no evidence to support your claim. The police report is the evidence that will support a claim, at least to some extent.
I mean, again, that makes sense. It's kind of a basic thing. It should be almost common sense, but I guess if you don't go through the motions a lot, it's just something you don't think about, what is my next step? Well, Brad, it's already hit. We're already an hour into this call, so I don't want to take up your entire day. So here in a minute, what I'll probably do is I'll ask our final closing questions. As a reminder, you can percolate on these. Question number one is just going to be, if you can go back in time, meet young Brad, and give him some advice. What advice would you give yourself and why, other than the obvious, which is buy a lot of Bitcoin? I know you don't know what that is, but just trust me, hold it till 60K. And the second question is, if I gave you my magic pen and you could change one law, edit it, strike it from the books, add a new one, whatever it happens to be, what law would you change and why? While you're percolating on that, we're going to jump back over and take a look again at your site. Again, I am talking with Bradford Kendall, who runs the eponymous law firm that bears his name, which is a little redundant to say it that way, but it's the Kendall Law Group. Go to KendallInjuryLaw.com. That's KendallInjuryLaw.com. You can also call them at 816-531-3100. That's 816-531-3100. We will have a link, as always, in the description below. He has been on, what is that, Great Day KC? Whatever it's called. I know the show, but I
Yeah,
can't see
great day, Casey.
Great Day Casey. Great reviews. You can see his website, Super Lawyers, AV from Martindale Hubble, 10.0 from AVO, and everything else. And if you are in the Kansas, Missouri, Colorado, or Nebraska area and you've been injured, I think Brad would be a wonderful resource for you. He has multiple attorneys there as well, and a lot of resources on their website. So again, if you have been injured, please feel free to reach out to Brad. That's KendallInjuryLaw.com. Our final sponsor for today is Rank with News. If there was a guaranteed way to get your law firm or business featured in major national publications like Yahoo News, Business Insider, Forbes, Bloomberg, etc., and see those articles ranking locally, sometimes in as little as 8 hours for major competitive keywords that people are actually searching for, what else would you need to know? Rank with News is simply the most powerful way to hit page 1 of Google in under 2 weeks safely, organically, and permanently. This is functionally guaranteed SEO, or search engine optimization, on steroids, ranking quickly and sticking long term. If you're tired of poor visibility for your business, visit rankwithnews.com to learn more and book a time with a specialist to speak about featuring your firm or your business in major national 8-figure traffic sites that can launch you to page 1 in a matter of hours, help you dominate your local marketplace, get media exposure, rank higher in Google, build credibility, and win more customers and clients with rankwithnews.com. All right, so Brad, we travel back in time. We meet young Brad, fresh out of law school back in 1990, and you're able to go up and just whisper a little bit of advice in your own ear. What advice are you going to give yourself, and why? And of course, by extension, anybody else that maybe is fresh out of law school.
I've really never thought of that question, but what I'll say is this, Justin. In law school, they teach you nothing, at least when I went to law school, about the nuts and bolts of actually being a lawyer. And they teach you the thing that most law schools are proud of is they teach you to think like a lawyer. And then you're thrown out into the ocean of being a lawyer, and it's like, now what? What do I do? Because they don't teach you the skills of how you actually do the business of being a lawyer. And so you kind of have, I was lucky that when I got going as a, 25-year-old or whatever I was, as a new lawyer, the firm that hired me allowed me to essentially try cases and have my own docket of cases and take depositions literally right out of the chute. And that was great experience that is priceless. But I think maybe what I would have told myself back then is, it takes courage and believe in yourself, because a lot of us who are successful lawyers have what, this imposter syndrome deal where we're always, fear of failure, things like that. And that drives a lot of people, not just lawyers. But, and so you couple what they don't teach you in law school with then what you're required to do as a lawyer. And it does take some courage to be able to, and maybe that's one of the reasons why so many young lawyers are overly aggressive and difficult, is because they're overcompensating for what they're required to do as a lawyer with really no training to do it. And so maybe that would be it, which is, hey man, take a deep breath, relax. It's going to be okay, because there's a lot of tension as you're starting as a lawyer. Maybe it's law firm tension, maybe it's just the tension of having to figure this out as you go. But that's probably what I would have said to myself, 35 years ago.
That's not bad advice, and I think that's good advice for just about anybody, really. So I can't I can't say that's a bad thing. I think that really is it's good advice for anyone to bear in mind. Okay, so I have a magic pen here. We're gonna call it a miraculous pen because this pen is actually from St. Benedict's Abbey, which is a monastic community here in beautiful Atchison, Kansas. It's a group of guys, brothers, who live together, and they're up the hill. That one of the things that founded this town. Anyway, I'm going to give them a free shout out. It's kansasmonks.org, kansasmonks.org. But I think one of the priests must have blessed this pen, because I found it has a magical property that it can strike laws from the books, it can edit laws that are on the books, or it can add new laws to the books. So if I were to let you borrow this miraculous pen and you could make one change to the law, now this could be, again, a major law with sweeping national, even international ramifications, or it could be a tiny little law that just forces you to fill out paperwork and triplicate every single day that just drives you nuts, or you could just, get rid of parking tickets, whatever it happens to be. What law would you change, add, edit, delete with my pen, and why?
Well, I would probably look at the areas that I'm familiar with, what I work in, the personal injury field. And, in Missouri, there's that terrible law we talked about earlier that caps, non-economic damages and medical negligence cases. That's a ridiculous law that I think should go away, because it's just to be put through some kind of horror from a medical mistake that has caused a lifetime of pain and suffering, and to have a cap on it is ridiculous. And that would probably be one, when we do these nursing home cases and other malpractice cases, we have to confront with that every single time. Even in nursing home cases, they're classified in Missouri as medical malpractice cases. And so that law applies to, your grandma's in there and she's a fall risk, and they allow her to fall and break her hip, and then she's gone within 90 days, as most people are when that happens. And the agony that, she would have gone through before she died, you have that cap on it. And states that don't have that cap, these claims are dealt with a lot differently. Illinois, for example, claims that are worth a lot more money, and it's just more justice, really, is what it is. It's not about how much more money we can get, but it's what's fair and what's just. And we have that limitation here in Missouri on that, which just really isn't fair.
And I figured that was what you're going to say. Whenever I talk to somebody in PI and they're in an area where there's a cap, that's almost always what they go for. And I don't blame them, because maybe we'll make a national law, no caps.
Yeah.
At least a much higher cap than those. It sounds like a big amount to the average person, until you realize this is for the rest of your life that you're going to be in this state. So I don't blame you on that, not one bit. Well, Brad, thank you very much for taking this time to talk with me today, and to my listeners. I do always like to let my guests have the final word. Is there any parting words of wisdom or last thoughts you'd like to leave our listeners with today?
No, not really, Justin. I appreciate you having me. It's been fun. And if we can help anybody, they know how to reach out, and we'll be happy to look at their situation.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Brad, thank you very much for talking with us today. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I enjoyed kind of diving into the railroad law stuff. That's something that I've never really talked about with a client or with a guest before, which is really a lot of fun. For those of you listening, this has been the Attorney Post. I am your host, as always, Justin West, and I've been chatting with Brad Kendall of the Kendall Law Group, LLC, based in Kansas City, Missouri, though he lives in Kansas City, Kansas. As always, though we do talk about lots of legal issues on this podcast does not constitute legal advice. And if you have a legal issue that you need the advice of an attorney, you should always never assault an attorney. You should always consult with an attorney who has relevant experience in your area, who knows about the matter you need help with. Obviously, if you live in Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, or Colorado, I think Brad would be a wonderful resource for you. So again, please feel free to reach out to him. You can call him at 816-531-3100 or visit KendallInjuryLaw.com. I believe consultations are always free. So reach out and get that help, because again, it's always best to know what you're going into before the situation happens. For those of you who are listening to this on YouTube, we always appreciate a like, subscribe, and a share. Please feel free, especially to subscribe or leave a comment if you learned anything new on this podcast today. On any of the other podcast repositories, we also appreciate a rating or whatever it happens to be. Most importantly, if you know someone who could benefit from the information that we talked about today, please share this podcast with them in video form or audio form, because as I always say, if you don't know your rights, you don't have any. Until next time, I'm your host, Justin West. Thanks for listening.